morning. We are going to talk about domain and range today. And very simply, domain are the x values and range is the y values. And that's generally the bottom line. All right, so you can see this listed or done in a couple different ways. So I'm just going to demonstrate those and then that'll be that for this. All right, so let's say you had these points. I'm just kind of making them up right now as we go. They're not coming from anywhere other than my head. Okay, so those are some coordinates that we have. And you can see they're written differently than we're used to seeing, but it's in a chart, x's and y. So if you want to know what the domain is, domain are the x values. So the domain would be just a list of those numbers. -2, 5, 8, and 10. Okay? Range is the y values. So again, you'd make the little set brackets and just list your range. Now, obviously, it's nice to have them listed in order from least to greatest, but it really doesn't matter as long as you write down the x's and you write down the y's. And just for purposes of discussion, let's say in this, we also had another point, okay? Now, we actually don't change the domain and range here because look, we already had -2 in the domain, so we don't need to write it twice. It appears twice, but we don't need to write it twice, all right? And we already had a 1 in the range, so even though it appears twice, you write it one time, okay? That's one way you might see it in a table. Another way that you might see it would be just a list of coordinates. And again, I'm just making these up. All right, so if that is our relation, a set of points, then we can write the domain and the range. Domain is y values. Whoa, what in the world? Domain is x values. So we're going to write down the x's. Remember, coordinates are x, y, x, y, x, y. So we're going to write the domain, the x values, 5, 0, -10. Those are our x values. The ranges are y values, so -3, 2, 9. And that really is all there is to it. Sometimes you'll see domain and range asked in a thing that looks kind of like this. It's called a mapping diagram. So I'm just going to write some numbers. And you'll often see arrows on these mapping diagrams. Okay, and those literally just represent a set of points. The first oval being the x coordinates and the second one being the y coordinates. Now, just because I'd like to show you this, I'm going to write these out as a list of coordinates. This represents the point 8, 5. You can see 8 pointing to the 5. 7, -3. 7 points to -3. 2 points to 2. And 0 points to -3. All right, so if we're going to write the domain and the range for this, remember domain is the x value. So we're going to choose the first coordinate. And the y's are part of the range, and those are the second coordinate. So the domain, you can literally take it from up here, is 8, 7, 2, 0. The range are the y's right here, 5, -3, 2. And for those of you that like color coding, the domain and the range. Okay? All right, and now I'm going to show you the ones that are the most confusing. When you have it on a graph, this tends to be very confusing. Not only is it confusing to do, but it's also different notation. These are continuous, so they keep going, where these are just points that are separated on the graph. Okay, so the best way that I have found to do this is to look across. Okay, so domain, I'm just going to write D this time and R for range. Domain is the X values. This is the X axis. So I'm going to look below and find where my picture starts. What we're looking at is this graph. Okay, so where do I first see it? Well, if I'm looking from left to right, I see it starting here, and what I see is an arrow. So I'm going to draw an arrow. And then I'm going to draw with my marker as I see it. So see, I keep seeing it. There's still a picture. There's still a picture. There's still a picture. There. Oh, it ended with an arrow. Okay. If there's an arrow going this way, that means negative infinity. If there's an arrow going this way, it means positive infinity. So the domain of this one is going to go from negative infinity to positive infinity. And it actually gets written weird. If it's infinity, you use a parenthesis on the ends to show that it goes on forever. Okay, so this looks like a coordinate, but it's not. It's called interval notation. And what it means is that the domain is any number from negative infinity to positive infinity. All right, let's look at the range. The range is the y values. Remember, the y-axis is this axis. So we're going to go off to the side, and we're going to look from the bottom to the top. Well, where I first see the graph, there's an arrow. So I'm going to put an arrow. And then I'm going to keep looking. I see my graph. I see my graph. I see my graph. And yes, it goes up and down, but that doesn't matter. I see it all the way up until there. Okay? Pointing down, negative infinity. Pointing up, positive infinity. And so the range is also negative infinity to positive infinity. Any point is on this graph, or any point, any x value or y values on that graph. All right, so let's do it one more time for this graph. Again, we're going to find the domain and the range. Here's what we're focused on. And here we go. When I first see this graph coming from the left, I see it right here, and there's a dark circle, a point, okay? And I keep seeing my graph, and I keep seeing my graph, and I keep seeing it all the way until here where there's an arrow. So this point here is negative 1, 2, 3, 4. So our graph begins at negative 4, and it goes until an arrow, which is infinity. If this is a filled in circle, we're going to use a bracket like that. So negative 4 until infinity, which gets a parenthesis. That's domain. For range, we're going to look at the y value. So we're going to look from the bottom, and where we first see it is right here. See how it starts right there? And we see it, and we see it, and we see it, and we see it all the way until here. Okay, but this is simply going straight out to the side. It's not going up anymore. So we see it all the way until there, and then it stops. We're not going to see it as we continue to look up. And so we need to figure out what those points are. Well, this is negative 1, 2, and this is positive 1. So our range goes from negative 2, and it's a bracket because it's a filled in circle, to positive 1. All right, that is domain and range in a nutshell. Have a fabulous day.